Hey, what's up? This is Mia, and today we are going to prep and can our own applesauce. So let's begin. So before we get too deep in this video, I wanted to take a quick second to give you a little background of what you see in front of you. During the last week, we were given an assortment of fruits and vegetables and beans and all that good stuff. And instead of trying to eat it all at once or allowing it to waste away, I figured that this would be a great time to learn how to prepare and can the food. So when I finally get my harvest to come in the yard, we will be good to go. So in order not to waste so much goodness, I've decided that I'm going to learn how to prep and can some, freeze some, and also cook some. So we got quite a few videos coming up for that. So for my first canning video, I've decided that I'm going to learn how to make and also properly can applesauce. Since this was a pretty simple recipe, I really didn't need much. I just got 2 different types of apples, some mason jars, my canning starting set, some raw sugar, some applesauce, and some lemons, and the tools that you need in order to get started. So the first task was to peel the apples. So after washing the apples off, I took a peeler and I went ahead and peeled the skin off of each apple. In addition, I wanted to make sure that any real brown spots I got just kind of cut out and got rid of. So as for the type of apples, I decided to use Gala and Granny Smith. I thought the sweet and tart would balance out, especially with the additions that I add into it. Now, once I peeled the apples, I went ahead and used the chopper to actually remove the core out of it and to break the apples into smaller pieces so they could cook easier. And when it came to the peels, I just put those in my compost bucket so I could take them out to my compost bin. And for my first batch, the amount of apples that I used about, I would say 15, and it was more so Gala apples and probably about, I would say 10 Gala apples and about 5 Granny Smith apples because that's what I was given. But feel free to substitute it with your favorite apples. You may love Honey Crisp instead, or you just may want to do Granny Smith all the way. It's really up to you. I just pretty much used what was available and made it work. To keep the apples from browning, I went ahead and used a lemon. I sliced it in half and I made sure that I squeezed it out over the apples and stirred it up really well so the apples wouldn't brown. Now, the only downfall of using a lemon is that you have to make sure you pick the seeds out because you will find yourself, as you're squeezing it, the seeds will just slip out and fall into the apples. So after I got done peeling all the apples, I went ahead and put the rest of the peels in the compost bin, and then I took the second half of the lemon and squeezed it over the apples and stirred it up real good. Next, it was time to cook the apples. So I decided to use a Dutch oven and sweet apple juice. Now, you could use unsweetened if you like, but I used sweetened to see if that would help when I tried to reduce the amount of sugar because I really didn't want to make it super sweet. After that, I applied my apples to the pot and I stirred them up and gave them a few minutes to cook. So after the apples cooked for about 5 minutes, I would say, a little bit more than half of a cup of raw sugar. In addition, I added little extra things like cinnamon and nutmeg, but it really depends on your flavor and what you like. Oh, also, the pink item that you see right there, that's Himalayan salt. I only added like a half of a teaspoon of that because I didn't want it to become overbearing in the applesauce. So after I put everything I wanted in there, I grabbed a spoon and stirred it up a few more times and put the lid on it and let it cook for another 20 minutes. After about 20 minutes, the apples really started to break down, and I even took my spoon to kind of push some of them and break them up to see how tender they were, and they were doing great. Now, initially, it looked like there was a little too much apple juice in there, but once I started stirring things around, it really started balancing out. While I waited for the apples to finish cooking, I went ahead and sterilized my jars. Now, this particular pot is called a water bath canner. It's a pretty large pot that has a metal rack at the bottom of it so that when you put the jars in, it doesn't fall all the way to the bottom or the jars don't sit at the bottom, which can cause a damage to the jars if the pot gets too hot. Now, while the mason jars were boiling, I went back to the apples and did my final stir in before moving it to the blender. I decided to put it in a blender because I wanted the first batch to be really smooth in a sense. The second go around, I'm going to do a more chunkier version, but I wanted to see how the blender would turn out. Just for a heads up, as you are moving the apples to the blender, make sure the pot is off because you don't want to burn your pot and you don't want to burn the apples while you're trying to transition them between the two. So after I blended for about 30 seconds, the applesauce turned out really smooth. Now keep in mind that as the applesauce cools, it would actually thicken up. After I got done with the applesauce, I went ahead and took the mason jars out of the pot and sat them to the side. Now I didn't wait until they cooled. I figured since the applesauce was still kind of hot and the mason jars were hot, it would really help with the water bath canning. Filled each jar up to about 1 inch from the top, which you see that I have to actually do the second batch to fill the other two up. But I also took a napkin and wiped off the rims to make sure that it would seal better. So you don't want to fill it all the way to the top because you don't want it to overflow or obstruct the sealing during the water bath process. And also you want to make sure that you finger tight it before you put it in. Since the second jar was half filled, I went ahead and used the rest of the apples to make the rest of the applesauce, and I fill up an additional jar. I followed the same process that I did the first jar, and I went ahead and put the lids on there and finger tightened it so that it was ready to put into the pot. So I want you to keep in mind that the lid actually comes in 2 parts. So as you're putting it on there, or before you put it on there, you want to make sure that you put it in hot water, but you don't want the water to be boiling because there's a sealant on the bottom of the lid that actually holds the top and the jar together. So next it was time for canning. I went ahead and checked for air bubbles in the applesauce prior, but then I turned around and tightened every top to make sure that no air would get in when I put it in the water. So after everything was ready, I went ahead and put the jars into the water bath canner. You want to make sure that you sit them in there on the rack so that no water will splash on you. After that, I put the lid on it and let it boil for about 25 minutes. After about 25 minutes, I pulled them out one by one and I sat them on the cooling rack. Now, I didn't immediately take the lid off or anything. I literally just let them sit overnight to cool. After I let it sit overnight, I pushed down on top of the lid to make sure that I didn't hear any popping noises. Usually when you don't hear that, that means that it's sealed very well. After that, I end up taking the lid off just to make sure that the lid was sealed very tightly onto the jar, and it was. After I was sure that it was completely cooled, I went ahead and put it in the refrigerator just so we could see how thick it gets and also to see how it tastes. This was a pretty cool project, if I do say so for myself.
Alright, so we have completed making the homemade applesauce, and I have my daughter standing next to me to do the taste test because I want to see how it tastes. We let it sit in the refrigerator for a couple of days, and now we're getting ready to see.
It's cold.
It's cold, not horrible. It's cold.
It's really good. Oh yeah, it's really good.
So
It's a little bit sweeter than rosemary applesauce, but it's still good.
yeah, that's the only thing I would change about it. I won't use. I learned from this experience, when you're using sweetened apple juice, you don't have to use as much sugar, so it's a little bit sweet. So next time, since I'm using the sweetened apple juice, I'm going to use less sugar, or I'm going to use the unsweetened apple juice and use the sugar I use. So there we go. And she's steady eating it, and it looks good. So we did good today. Yay! So just to let you know, thank you for tuning in. It turned out great. She's still eating it and walking away because I pushed her out the video. So that's it for today. If you have not already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, and go ahead and like this video. And if you have any encouraging words, please let me know in the comments below. And yeah, stay tuned. The next thing I'm a can is going to be orange marmalade. So that being said, you guys have an awesome day and stay super-tastic.